We all know that Ukraine has invaded Kursk, occupying an estimated 770 square kilometers of territory, or perhaps up to 1,200. Remember those numbers for later. But what exactly has Russia done to stop it? Well, some defensive lines are forming, and unlike the bluster you hear out of state capitals, these have real meaning. So, today, it is time to read between the lines and talk about Russia's defensive line construction dilemma, including the general theoretical problem, what Russia chose to do, what the Kremlin's motivation here might be, and whether it will ultimately pay off. But we should begin with the general theoretical problem. The prelude to the current dilemma dates to the beginning of August. Russia had defensive lines around Kursk, but the Kremlin chose to leave them understaffed, thereby giving Ukraine the opportunity to trample all over them. Now, we have discussed already why the Kremlin made that mistake, so today's defensive line dilemma is different. Rather, the key question here is what Russia should do after the line has been breached, which is the world in which we currently live. As it turns out, there is a lot of space between Sumy, the city from which Ukraine staged the offensive, and Moscow. And just because you have lost one defensive line does not make it impossible to build some more. However, the dilemma is how deep to start constructing the next ones. Indeed, there is a risk-return trade-off between digging close to the original breach and bringing the new line much further back. If you could snap your fingers and magically have a defensive line appear, then obviously you would want to do it on top of where the offensive currently is. After all, a tight formation would protect the most land. As a practical matter, though, you actually have to dig the silly things, and that does not happen instantaneously. Worse, during the process, you expose yourself to enemy fire. You can see the consequence of the danger of counter-trench fire by looking at the location of the original defensive line. Russia did not place it directly on the border with Ukraine. If Russian soldiers had tried to do so, they would have been sitting ducks for Ukrainian fire. But with an offensive ongoing, the solution is not just to take a tape measure, check the distance from the border to the original defensive line, and now with that line gone, check where Ukraine currently sits, apply the same distance, and build a new line. You also need to project where Ukraine will be once the entrenchments become useful. Go aggressive, and you could cut Ukraine's offensive short, but Ukraine might also outrace you to the line. And moreover, its soldiers will be motivated to do so once spotters see the ground broken and realize that the clock is ticking. If the rush succeeds, all of the effort that you put into the line will be lost, and you will go back to square one. Actually, you might regress to -1 if you have lost some of your earth movers in the process. But if you situate yourself too far back, then you are welcoming further cheap pushes from Ukraine. As a result, successful line construction is not just an exercise of construction logistics. It is also a matter of intelligence and accurate assessments of how fast your enemy can progress. Get it right, and you can stop Ukraine from gaining territory. Get it wrong, and your problem might snowball, up to and including losing the territory around a nuclear power plant that lights the entire area. Okay. That is the basic theory of line construction, holding everything else equal. But what has Russia actually done so far? Relatively speaking, the answer is to choose a conservative, far-away location. Yes, it is still in Kursk Oblast and not in Moscow City. But for the most part, trench diggers have started a comfortable distance from where Ukrainian troops occupy. This part here is about the same distance as the original fortifications were from the international border pre-offensive. That might be due to how the terrain gets wonky any further back. But the rest of it flares out much further from Ukraine's current location, and it runs roughly parallel to the E38 highway. Can't forget about logistics. A hint at why a conservative choice makes sense is that the Kursk nuclear power plant is here. Pro tip, if you were ever trying to locate it on a blank map, look for its water supply. This distance also protects the city of Kursk further east. In any case, the Kremlin seems to be wanting to play this mostly risk-averse, a choice that is also present in the Kremlin's domestic messaging on the subject. that it is a new normal that Russians will have to adjust to. Now, that does not mean that Russia is simply waiting for Ukraine to approach the initial fortification. Rather, Russian engineers have spent time since then slowly building additional lines in front of the original. That is because the original acts as an insurance policy, allowing Russia to make greater challenges to Ukraine afterward. It will also provide defense in depth should Ukraine at some point breach one of the lines. Eventually, Russia might want something that looks like this. By passing on an aggressive containment line, though, Russia will avoid watching Ukraine run roughshod over further territory, and not have to consider whether to shut down the nuclear power plant. Instead, with defense in depth, upon the initial attack, Russia just retreats to the line behind it, and makes Ukraine have to repeat the process over and over again. That will be taxing to Ukraine's soldier base, perhaps deterring the effort entirely. But we are still left with the question of why Russia has started this process so far away from Ukraine's advance. This question goes double now that we have the hindsight of how Kyiv has chosen to play things out. For the most part, Ukrainian troops have moved north slowly, and instead seem to be prioritizing along the sides of the line. The benefit to Ukraine, of course, is that doing so allows blue and yellow soldiers to take more territory, without having to stretch supply lines. There is also the tactical advantage to the west that we have discussed before, where Russian troops are trapped without their own supply lines. But Kyiv is still choosing to do this despite Russia having placed the initial line so far back. Now, it is possible that the Kremlin overestimated the potency of Ukraine's offensive, or fundamentally misunderstood what Ukraine's game plan was. After all, it is a bit unfair to criticize decisions in the heat of the moment, when we have the benefit of hindsight. But another possibility that matches Russia's bigger picture strategy is that Moscow just wanted more time. And that takes us to what is happening along the Eastern Front. Recall the tension between using inexperienced conscripts to stop Ukraine in Kursk, versus redeploying battle-hardened contract soldiers from the east. If you want to understand the deeper political problems here, we have covered that before. But from a pure military standpoint, the conscripts are bad but bored. In contrast, the contract soldiers are buff but busy. You see, while all Western eyes have been on Kursk, Russia is starting to make real progress along the Eastern Front. There has been pressure all the way down the line, but recently Russia has redeployed troops to what is becoming the main event. The location is along the Avdiivka salient, which originally stemmed from the city of Donetsk. You might remember Avdiivka as the city that Russia somehow never captured despite being next to the breakaway capital, and despite a decade of effort. At the start of the year, the situation precariously looked like this, and within 2 months, Avdiivka was in Russia's hands. Then, in April, Russia made real progress along the northern part, a consequence of catching Ukraine in the midst of a rotation. Over the next 2 months, Russia rounded out the salient, but the real pressure came in August, which started like this, and then finished like this. The gains are unquestionably a consequence of the Kursk offensive, where the absence of Ukrainian soldiers in the Donbass has given Russia a 5-to-1 manpower advantage in some locations. In fact, the ease by which Russia is moving in the area has led some Russians to wonder whether they are being led into a trap. Regardless, with the power play underway, you can see that Russia is doing something weird here. Usually, you do not want to keep a salient like this for a long time, lest the opponent attempt to flank you in response. Yet Russia is no longer placing much effort in trying to round out the sides. The missing piece is that the city of Pokrovsk is here, which serves as both a road and rail hub. Hence it is worth the risk for Russia to aim directly for it, as its capture will make defending the other areas around it difficult. Well, maybe not that catastrophic. It took many months for Russia to capture the similarly sized Bakhmut, but you get the idea. The problem for Russia with pushes like this is that they create moments of fleeting capacity. As of now, Russia has been working on the salient for almost a full calendar year. If the majority of Russian troops were to suddenly evacuate, they would not be able to come back in the spring and simply pick up where they left off. Even if Ukraine could not regain territory in the interim, Russia would lose all of its momentum. Ukraine would have time to take a knee, also take a couple of deep breaths, and reorient its defenses. Meantime, for Russia, all of the work that perhaps 5 figures of fatalities has put forth would evaporate. Now, remember that we are thinking about this in the context of whether to spend resources in Kursk or the Donbass. And, truth be told, Russia will want to spend more time exploiting the capture of Pokrovsk before returning to handle Kursk. You see, the whole benefit of taking a logistics hub is that it forces everything in the region to be rerouted. Of course, because the loss of Pokrovsk will not come as a surprise, Ukraine is already working on mitigating the damage. But still, Russia will have a fleeting moment of further exploitation until Ukraine reaches a new logistics equilibrium. All told, this meant that the defense of Kursk had to be, and still continues to be, put on pause. The Kremlin intends to get it back, of course, but not until its eastern offensive culminates. Given that, the Kursk defensive line had to be conservative. The best Russian troops would not be there for a while, and so an aggressive stance would have created too much of a domino problem. Now, this may sound like a sunk cost fallacy, but it is not. In fact, it is a good example of what I call the sunk cost fallacy, which is the idea that past costly actions should have no effect on current decisions. Here, all of those earlier Russian casualties have unlocked a limited time opportunity to attack Pokrovsk. This is in contrast to what happens with a traditional sunk cost fallacy, where the costs already paid have no bearing on what is available to you now. Given that, it is a perfectly sensible decision to keep going. Or to draw an analogy that poker players would pontificate, Putin is pot committed. Yes, some of the Eastern contract soldiers have gone to Kursk to provide tactical expertise, but the bulk of them remains in the Donbass. And that takes us to the remaining question, which is whether this will work for Russia. From a pure numbers perspective, Russia faces an uphill battle. I am not referring to soldiers here, where Russia clearly has the upper hand. Rather, I am talking about land. You need a scale to fully appreciate the offensives. And to do that, let's go back to the Avdiivka front. This is 20 kilometers. Across the Donbass in August, both here and elsewhere, Russia has captured about 351 square kilometers in total, with the plurality of it indeed coming from this salient. In the context of Russia's broader offensive, this was an exceptionally productive month. It is substantially better than the previous best of the offensive in May, even breaking my template, and that is despite May's number being inflated by Russia's surprise attack on Kharkiv. However, the scale back in Kursk is about 42 kilometers for this line. A conservative estimate for Ukraine's gains are 770 square kilometers, while other reports go as high as 1,200. But even if we ignore that larger number, and just focus on the conservative quantity, Kyiv has doubled up on Russia for the period. Heck, the gains even match all of Russia's from May through August, with a similar caveat that Ukraine's August numbers are also inflated by surprise. Regardless, though, the whole affair has conclusively demonstrated that Russia, too, lacks the manpower to handle a two-front war. That does not tell us anything about the long-run effects, of course. If the loss of Pokrovsk leads to more problems elsewhere, then the scoreboard may look very different between the two come December. Likewise, if Russia puts in a dedicated effort and quickly kicks Ukraine out of Kursk, then August will go down as a historical footnote. This should be especially concerning for Ukraine, because the main military benefit of the operation is to keep the West invested in the war, and thereby keep the arms flowing. But it will take months for Ukraine to realize any of those gains, perhaps not even until the next presidency. To quantify the progress, Americans wishing to decrease aid to Ukraine dropped from 34% in June to 28% post-Kursk, while increasers went from 21% to 25%. So there is still some work to be done by Kyiv here. Meanwhile, two problems remain for Russia. First, the bridge drama continues. There is a river here, and Ukraine's offensive has reached out like this. That has left Russian troops trapped, unable to escape through Ukraine's front, and unable to get consistent resupplies because Ukraine has destroyed all of the river bridges. That could lead to a very productive September for Ukraine, though the lack of progress there in late August is worth noting. The flip side is that November 2022 siege of Kherson is the most comparable situation, where you'll recall that it took a couple of months for Ukraine to force Russia's withdrawal. And second, there is a difference between regaining territory and regaining useful territory. Even if Russia sweeps back all of its lost land, the delay in between will determine what that land looks like. At the risk of dropping back into the classroom for a moment, drawing the costs of war as a section of territory is a useful metaphor, but it also has a literal application. By the end of fighting, the front line is going to look something like this, gray and ugly. The land will be visibly scarred, to the point that little green men will be able to see it from space when they pass by. Consequently, the gamble that Russia is taking in the east is not just a matter of long-term control. It is also that Kursk will still be usable by the time that Russia gets it back. Indeed, there will be a lot of strategic tension in the region for the next 2 months, with rain on its way, and with it, an elongated period where Kursk remains a battle space. Meanwhile, if you need to prepare for rain, why not cozy up by the fire with one of these excellent books on the war? Check the video description for more information on them. And if you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Take care.